Hi everyone, welcome to episode 4 of Baca's Arthuriana. Today we're going to talk about the Norman Conquest and Geoffrey of Monmouth's history of the kings of Britain. We're starting with the Conquest because it's a monumentally important turning point in the history of the English language, among other things. In 1066, William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, invaded England with an army of Norman, Breton, Flemish, and French soldiers. Normandy was a duchy that had been created via treaty between Carolingian French ruler, I kid you not, Charles the Simple, and Viking leader Rollo in 911. The Vikings who settled there became known as Normans. In 1002, English King Athelred the Unready married Emma of Normandy, and they had a son called Edward the Confessor. Edward took the throne of England in 1042. Athelred was what had previously been classified as an Anglo-Saxon, but that is a modern term that is rooted in some pretty racist ideologies and has recently been appropriated by white supremacists, so I won't be using it here. Basically, the Saxons were a people of Germanic descent who made their way to Britain after the fall of the Roman Empire in the 400s. This is why the Old English language is closer to German than it is to modern English. This is also why people had names like Athelred. Now, Edward the Confessor was the child of one Saxon descendant and one Norman one, so he represented a unity. It was a big deal. Edward died childless in 1066, and as you might imagine, his heritage made it so that multiple people felt that they had a claim to the throne of England. Everyone argued and fought for a while, but William the Conqueror won, though the English rebelled against him for a while too. But all of that military history, though it's super interesting, isn't what directly matters for the purposes of this class. What is important to today's lesson is the linguistic shift that happened when the introduction of a northern dialect of Old French, called Anglo-Norman, but again, racist undertones, into Old English. Vernacular in English took a huge turn. Athelred's became less common in favor of Norman-based names like Richard or William. By the time Geoffrey of Monmouth wrote his history in the early 1100s, 50-some years after the Conquest, the landscape of the English language had changed significantly. Old English was becoming early Middle English, a language that still might be fairly unrecognizable to you, but is much more familiar than Old English. Okay, onto the history of the kings of Britain. This work, as you read, gives us the complete history of Arthur. We got to read some excerpts that have been translated into modern English for today, and you'll notice how the mythology has developed over time. First of all, the landscape is recognizably English. There's prophecy afoot, and Merlin appears in the legend. There's also Christianity. As you read in the excerpts, notice how Arthur is being woven into British history. The narrative is more familiar. As king, Arthur assembles an army. He leads them. He does not single-handedly strike down nearly 1,000 men like he did in the Chronicle histories. The idea of noble love is also introduced into the narrative, what will become the tradition of courtly love. This is something we will be exploring more deeply starting next week. Characters that have become staples of Arthurian literature appear here too: Merlin, Guinevere, Mordred. Even some of the Knights of the Round Table, such as Gawain, Bedivere, and Kay, make an appearance. Some events are presented differently than we will see them later in Arthurian tales. For example, Guinevere and Mordred have an affair, Lancelot doesn't exist in this history, and the affair is the reason that Arthur and Mordred fight. I'll end this lesson by saying that Winchester was identified by Geoffrey as a place that was important to the foretelling of the coming reign of Arthur. To this day, Winchester Cathedral houses a round table, created about the year 1290, probably for a tournament celebrating the marriage of one of King Edward I's daughters. It was refinished by King Henry VIII in the 1540s. He had it repainted to show himself depicted as Arthur, because of course he did. You can still go see it today.